Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Nailed it.
Perfect.
We just did it, Charlotte. We successfully went 5 seconds.
It was a perfect moment of silence. It was very difficult, but we made it through to the other side.
Yeah. I could see Marcus turning red like he was about to explode.
Yeah.
Second three.
I have so many questions. That's the problem. I can't wait to get into this discussion.
I have so many too, but you've already told me that I have a list of things I can and can't ask, so if it's not a good interview, it's his fault.
Oh, is that right?
But all I could think about during that moment of silence was little baby poults.
Yeah. Well, I will say there's something to be said. Maybe that's a better way to introduce this. There is something to be said about living and breathing turkey. And when I say that, I literally mean you are being a turkey. You're a surrogate turkey mother. There are very few people on this planet that have played that role.
Yeah, and that's actually even more meaningful than it might sound, because turkeys are really unique in that they actually imprint. So the young poults hatch out of the egg, and they're looking for a set of sensory cues, like movement and vocalization, and just maybe even olfactory cues or different colors, etc. And they use those to sort of determine what their mom is. So when they hatch out of the egg and they see a person that's walking around, talking to them, moving, they imprint on that, and that's what they literally see as their mom, and they base all of their behaviors towards that thing. And not all animals do that by any means. So I am quite literally perceived as a turkey mom by the poults.
That is pretty incredible. We'll just say, I mean, and my desire to be in that role is so great, I can't even express it. And I will be on our next brood that's hatching, which I'm just beside myself excited about. But I thought it would be a good idea, and Will agreed that we should go ahead and talk, since a large portion of the range of turkeys, there are already poults on the ground. I mean, I just got a video that I shared the day that we're recording this of poults that are multiple weeks old. We have several hens that we have tagged throughout Florida that are actively brooding right now. We have lots of nests that are hatching. Will, you just said that somebody let you know of one in Alabama that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So poults are on the ground right now, and I thought, what a better time for us to talk about the development of poults. And who better to talk to than someone who's actually lived as a poult mama? So we have Dr. Kelly O'Neill, who's a postdoc in the UF Game Lab, and her focus is our poult imprinting project that we have mentioned multiple times, and this will be, I guess, kind of our debut to start revealing some of the things that we're learning from that study. I think it's just remarkable. It's right down the road, so I can go visit frequently, and I've just been obsessed with it, but not quite to the degree that Kelly has. So Kelly, can you give us some background, on the whole process? Like how did you get turkey eggs? And, let's go all the way from there. Maybe talk through the incubation process all the way to imprinting poults and what we're doing.
Yeah. So as Marcus mentioned, we have tagged hens across the state of Florida. Um, Quite a large number of tagged birds that we are monitoring their nesting activity. And unfortunately, we get a lot of situations where they abandon the nest. Sometimes we don't know why. Sometimes it's a specific human induced incident like mowing over the nest and causing the hen to abandon. And sometimes they get predated. Of course, we know that predation is really high while they're nesting. And if they get predated, we get a mortality cue and we know immediately.
Yeah, and when you say predated, sometimes it's the hen that gets eaten. I know we've had a few of those
Yes.
where the hen got eaten, and sometimes the nest itself is lost, but the hen is fine.
Yes, yeah. What I meant was the hen. So we've had a situation where a hen got eaten by a bobcat at about like 5:30 a.m. And so whenever our field crew saw that in the morning, they were like, "Oh, okay, this is an opportunity." The nest was already being incubated, so they had to like rush out there and get the eggs immediately. So it's a pretty intensive process if the eggs well, regardless, it's an intensive process because once we have the opportunity, we want to get the eggs before a predator does. But also, if the hen has already been incubating them, that incubation cannot be disrupted for a long period of time or the embryos will die.
Mm.
So we have this kind of makeshift portable incubator egg collection kit, which is it's literally a cooler full of millet and it has some big Tupperwares in it and some big like microwavable like heat packs, the things you would use for like sore muscles.
Hmm.
And so what we have our crew do is go find a microwave, heat up all the millet and heat up the heat packs to be able to sustain the temperature of the millet to about 99 degrees and get the eggs, put them in there, and they're like in these like egg cases within there. So they're kind of held in place and they're kind of down in the millets. They're protected and they're also kind of surrounded by that warmth. And the goal is to then get them to Gainesville, where our field site is that we're actually incubating them as quickly as possible. So somebody has to drop what they're doing and go meet up with the field crew. And usually we're meeting at like a random gas station somewhere, passing off a cooler of eggs. And
I mean, they're
then,
literally coming from hours away, and you have to sustain the temperature precisely at what they'd be incubated at, right? So,
I mean, you're carrying this stuff around like contraband, but it's
yeah,
it's like wild turkey eggs.
well, it's not contraband. In fact, it would be if we didn't have
Right.
a whole bunch of permits in
Yeah.
place to make sure that we
yes.
can do this.
Do not try this
So,
at home.
yeah,
Marcus, I feel like
Literally,
you
you
must
want to
have
do it, do domestic turkeys. You can buy them legally.
Marcus, I feel like you had something to do with the millet selection.
I did not
Oh,
actually. They
really?
came up with that.
Okay.
Apparently, the seed holds heat really well.
Okay.
And that was a really clever way to makeshift an incubator to keep them for a couple hours at a stable temperature.
I mean, that's a really good idea. How neat.
My research coordinator Ava used to work at the National Aviary, and she suggested that we reach out to someone there who's responsible for like rearing a bunch of birds. Um, so she was the one who gave the suggestion about using the millet.
That's so cool.
But yeah, it works really well. Usually when we check the, because we have a thermometer in there, like a food thermometer, and so when we get it, we check it just so we know. And usually it has hardly lost any um heat because it's insulated and there's so much millet in there. And then you've got the heat pads still warm.
Hmm. So how many of these nests have you collected so far?
We are on,
9, right?
well, so, I think we are on 6 clutches. Some of the clutches have been split up into multiple broods when they've hatched.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain the difference between eggs that some of them we have gotten them during laying or right before incubation started, so it's a complete nest, but she hasn't actively started incubating. How is that different than eggs that were from an incubating hen?
Well, it's way easier because we know the developmental stage of the eggs already. We know that they haven't begun developing, and there's not as much of a intense rush to get them collected and get them into the incubator because they can last several days if they haven't been incubated yet. We still generally, same day get them to Gainesville, but there's not as much of a rush, and then we don't have to assess what development stage they are and try to gauge how our incubation settings should be based on that. Because with the eggs that have already begun being incubated, if we don't have an exact known incubation time. So if it's a VHF tag where we just don't have as continuous of data, or we've had situations where it was also just a random untagged bird that somebody accidentally
Mm-hmm.
flushed and caused to abandon, and they called us and let us know. So we had no idea in some of those cases how
Like the
long.
one that got mowed over, for example,
Yeah,
that you mentioned.
yeah, that was just an untagged bird, so we didn't know anything about her. And so in those cases, we have to candle them. So we have this. It's basically a flashlight. It just is the right shape to kind of like push up against the wide end of the egg.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that in a dark area and look at the embryo inside and see what it's doing and how big it is. And we have like some printed out pictures from other species where people have taken like really good pictures at different incubation stages of like ducks, for example, that have a similar
Mm-hmm.
incubation period to turkeys. And so we have to look at that and kind of characterize what's going on inside the egg and try to determine how far along they are. And then we'll do that. Starting off, we do it every 3 days. And then when we get more into somewhat close to hatching, we do it every single day so we can like make our estimate of the hatch date even more accurate. And then we go into like the hatch zone where we just turn all of the turning functions off. We don't touch the eggs. And we just watch them. And when it gets close to day 28, we're watching them often throughout the day, like checking them every couple hours to see if pipping has started. And so we're just leaving them alone and waiting for them to hatch at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But
So,
yeah, with
so
the
before we get into that process, because I think the process of them joining us in the world outside the egg is pretty remarkable itself. But I had a couple of things I wanted you to talk about. One, how accurate with this candling process have you guys been? Like you're projecting they're going to hatch on this day. How accurate have you been?
pretty accurate. With that first clutch where the nest was mowed over and we didn't know anything about the hen, um, the first egg hatched like the night before our projected hatching date, like our initial projected hatching date based on candling. And based on like the few days before, we knew that it was happening kind of like any time now. So we were ready. Like we had a cell cam set up on the incubator. So when we left that night, we were like, okay, we're just gonna keep checking it. And we kind of expected that it was gonna happen at any time. And then
So
it
you
did.
were a half day off.
Yeah, essentially from our initial like estimate based on candling. And that was like
Which present, I guess if that was the first egg, but a bunch of the eggs were on the day that you projected.
yeah, most of them were. There's a span of about 3 days that those eggs hatched, so,
And is that consistent across all of them? Have you been that close on all of them?
um, I think there were some that, there was at least one that hatched a good bit before we initially expected, but that's because I think that, I think it was a VHF hen where the field crew thought that she had just started incubating but it turned out that she had been incubating for quite a while. And so we still knew, based on the periodic candling, we are like, oh, these guys are actually a lot further along in developing. But when we initially got them, we
Yeah.
didn't think they were that far along.
So I was going to ask, of Kelly, of the eggs that you've collected during the laying process that have not been incubated, so you guys are the ones to initiate incubation. How close to 28 days has that process been?
It's been exact.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Isn't
you
that
can pretty
cool?
much guarantee that you put them in day 1, 28 days later, they're coming out.
Yeah. I mean, we've
That's
only had
incredible.
we had one clutch in that situation that hatched so far. It's the one that my technician Jay is raising right now. And yeah, we like a few days before the projected hatch, we were still watching them all the time and stuff, but it was like the day of day 28 that it being actually started. So,
You know what would be interesting, Marcus, is what if you could simulate in those incubators, and I know this is something that you'd want to do way on down the line, which would be like a secondary or tertiary objective of this, because there's so many great questions that we want to answer them all at once,
Yeah.
but you have to like chip away at this. But I think it would be interesting to simulate different recess frequency and length with the incubator and see how that affects the hatch. Both
That's
the
a really good idea.
timing of the hatch and then the survival of the poults and things like that, because presumably, the hens that are in better body condition or that are in better cover so that they're disturbed less frequently are going to take fewer of those recesses.
That's a good
yeah.
idea. Write that one down, Kelly.
Yeah, no,
I
that is
like
a
that.
great idea and something that we could, totally do with our current setup. And my hypothesis would be that the overall hatching rate would be lower with more frequent or longer recesses because some of those eggs are going to die during that period
Yeah.
if they're not kept warm enough.
Yeah.
And also, it may affect things like the synchrony of hatching because
Yeah.
eggs may be differentially affected by that, and then that may cause them to hatch in
Mhm.
a greater time span. So maybe one whole hatches 2 days after the other instead of them all hatching in the same day.
Yeah. Well, and you think about like all the eggs can't be in the middle, right? So the ones in the middle might retain heat longer because
Mm.
they're surrounded by others, whereas the ones on the edge might not hold temperature as well. So, Kelly, one thing that has been remarkable, I will say, from my perspective of this whole process, because you guys had to figure a lot of this out, and I've definitely tried to provide as much input and answer questions or anything, but I haven't done this before either. And I've been really impressed with some of the clever things that y'all have come up with. And one of those things that I thought was particularly interesting is that you found a key, like for candling, on how to do development, and it was from some kind of duck that has a 28-day incubation period because it literally doesn't exist for turkeys. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and also
So it doesn't even
because
exist for domestics?
Not that we could find. We couldn't
Wow.
find like something that had photos of candling at different developmental stages. There
so
was chickens, and but chickens have a shorter incubation period. And then yeah, we found a duck that had a 28 days. So we were like,
yeah.
that's kind of our best gauge.
Wow.
So our audience, I know, is split between YouTube and other platforms that you're listening on. But we're gonna cut in a lot of the footage all the way up till now. So if you're not watching on YouTube, you need to go back and check this out because a lot of this footage is incredible. But with this, we can put up that key that you found and how you're using that to stage development. But I think also importantly, we all had the what's the word, the awareness that this is our opportunity to create that for wild turkeys. So that was one of the things that also was really beneficial of getting some eggs that haven't started incubation because we know they haven't started developing yet.
Right.
And now you have on that nest, or at least one of them, right? You started from the initiation of incubation and have documented the development of those eggs all the way to hatch, which I think is a
Yeah.
pretty cool thing. We can develop that key for wild turkeys.
Yeah. And like, we're not photographers or anything, but we did it to the best of our ability, use a nice camera and get all the settings good. And we had like, I'm sure there's footage of this too, but we have this like box that has a big thick blanket over it, and we shove our heads in there so that we're in complete. We have the egg up on like the candler is like
It's up on a pedestal.
we built a like little cardboard holder thing for it so it's there, and we can set the egg on it and very carefully balance it, make sure that it's on there good, and then we could get pictures. And so we took a picture for that nest every single day of those eggs throughout development so we can make our own turkey candling chart and like be even more accurate. People could potentially even, if there was a nest that was abandoned and they weren't planning on rearing them, they could still potentially use that to um gauge the when incubation
Yeah,
had started for that nest. So that
yeah,
could be.
that's all kinds of important applications. I just, the other thing I'll mention, Will, did you have any idea how many times they were going to have to go to Hobby Lobby to pull all this off? Because I feel like we've had to make all kinds of makeshift things
Yeah,
because they
there's
don't
no
exist.
telling. There's no telling what skill set you're going to have to learn in this field sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
That's kind of what makes it fun and interesting, especially when you're innovating like that, like y'all are right now.
yeah. It's part of being a field biologist.
Make it
You're
work.
yeah,
definitely got to be crafty.
yeah. Well, I know we focused a lot on eggs, and I'm not done yet, but we'll move on to poults here pretty quick, I think. So you're weighing the eggs really frequently,
Yeah,
right?
so we're also weighing the eggs every single day. And really, the reason we did this initially is mostly because we wanted to track the eggs will lose mass over time, and they're supposed to lose it at a specific rate. At least as a general thing for bird eggs in general that are developing. And so again, because there's a lot of info on domestic turkeys, and there's different people report using different incubation settings, and we kind of wanted to like perfect them. So we were tracking that pretty intensively so that we could adjust our incubation settings, primarily the humidity, um, making sure that it was high enough, but not too high to promote that slow mass loss.
I'm just thinking, you said not too high. I'm thinking about, well, if it doesn't exceed that in South Florida, you're
Yeah.
probably okay. But I'm,
They're
Yeah,
basically submerged in water.
yeah.
Uh, yeah,
60% is what we found to be the perfect humidity level. Um,
But there's
for
also that microclimate around it while she's incubating too that
yeah.
probably
Mhm.
affects things. So
So it may be higher humidity ambient,
yeah,
but with her incubating, I, I wouldn't
maybe
be
it affects it
surprised if that's where it's
differently.
at. Like it
Yeah,
stays stable.
right.
Yeah, I just thought that little tidbit would be interesting. So, what about you've said the word pipping multiple times. Can you talk about the poult trying to exit the egg to
Yeah.
join us in this world?
Yep. So basically, when it gets to the point where the bird is going to hatch, there's just a bird embryo kind of curled up in the fetal position in the egg. And then there's this little thing called the air cell at the bottom, at the wide end of the egg. And the bird will orient itself to where its bill is right at the top of that air cell. And at some point, it will poke its beak through. And they have something called an egg tooth. That's a little tiny structure on their beak that's like just a little tooth-like protrusion that helps them exit the egg. And so it helps them do what's called pipping, which is where they poke through the eggshell. And then that falls off within like a day or
Hmm.
so after
Isn't
hatching.
that crazy? When I saw the egg tooth, I was like, "What? that's not what I was expecting.
Yeah,
So we'll put
it's
some
really
footage of
adorable.
this. But they look like a little dinosaur, which I
Yeah.
know they kind of are little dinosaurs.
Yeah.
But the egg tooth makes it look like a dinosaur to me.
That's so
Yeah.
cool. I want to see that footage for sure.
So they
Yeah.
pip and then they do that around like a pretty even like circle across that air cell, and that's what's called unzipping. So as they pip 360 degrees all the way around, they've unzipped the egg, and then all they need to do is just give a good push and push it open, and then they can hobble out of there and kind of enter the world. And we have some videos even of that hatching process, so you guys can see some of that. But it's pretty awesome, and you can tell it's just like, I mean, it takes so much. I feel like for them to build up the um, I don't want to like anthropomorphize too much, but like what comes to mind is like building up the like courage to just like do it, because
Hmm.
you're in that embryonic fluid in an egg for all of your existence that you've known up to this point, and then you're just gonna pop out and just be like shocked there's just empty space all around you, and like weird things that you have no perception of existing.
Yeah, all this Bahia grass and ryegrass that I have to walk through now.
um, well, there's a couple of things that I'm keying in on. I know, Will, I'm probably dominating the conversation a little too much, but I've seen so many things that I want to make sure that people hear that have kind of just been like revelational or shocking or exciting to me. Uh, so one thing, I think we've talked about it before, but if the poult develops appropriately, it should absorb all of the remaining yolk, right, in the egg, and that serves as
Yes.
energy initially. How long does that happen?
About 3 days. So, and you can actually feel the pulse like chest area and how squishy it is, and kind of gauge how much yolk
Oh,
that is.
wow.
So if they've properly absorbed all of the yolk, which is ideal, and they should do, when they come out of the egg, then it's just an empty eggshell. Everything from the egg is inside of them, and they're able to live off of that for a few days, and they'll feel super squishy, like in their chest area. And then yeah, in the wild, if these poults, they don't all always hatch at exactly the same time, and so they're kind of stuck at the nest with the hen until all the eggs have hatched, and that's when they leave the nest and go via to forage. And they also don't they're not necessarily born knowing how to forage. They have some instincts, but they're not going to be very efficient from the get-go.
Hmm.
So they really need that initial energy source to help them survive until the point where they are foraging, and they're foraging efficiently enough to be able to actually feed themselves and not starve.
Hmm.
So the other thing I wanted to mention before we move away from the eggs to that, because I think now this is some really interesting stuff that you've been able to observe with the poult's development, behaviorally and just biologically developing. Um, the other thing that I have found interesting, I think we've mentioned it before, Will, but there seems to be a lot of communication
Yeah,
between eggs and between poults in the
I was going to
egg and
ask
right
about that.
after,
Yeah.
and with the mother hen. So, can you talk about that a little bit, where you've observed how it affects their hatching?
Yeah, and can I layer on top of that, Kelly? What's your first indication that the hatching process has started? Is it when the first bird actually pips, or is it that they start to vocalize before they pip?
Usually, what we'll see about 2 days before the first pipping, if we're checking the eggs frequently, is we'll see the eggs wiggle.
Okay.
So
That's so cool.
we'll be like, okay, the egg is wiggling. In 2 days, it's probably gonna start pipping, and so that's what we've seen. And
Maybe
then,
that's them wiggling around to reorient to the air sac that you were talking about earlier. Maybe
yeah,
that's
it's
part of
I
that
think
process.
it's them wiggling around a lot inside of there,
Trying to
getting
get in
ready. And
position.
they're so big now that they're big enough to actually wobble the egg.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like there's no space left in the egg, basically, right? And they have their head even tucked under their wing
Hmm.
if they're in the appropriate position.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah,
they're
and
curled up
then
into a little ball, I guess.
they definitely seem to respond to people talking to them. So they've been
Yeah.
hearing human voices all throughout their development. So it's sort of similar to if they were in the wild and they were hearing the hen. Um, we think that the hen does do vocalizations to the eggs throughout the incubation process. And so from these eggs' perspective, we sound like what the thing that is going to be their hen. And us
Mm-hmm.
talking to them, and if we lean into the incubator and start talking, we do see more wiggling. And if there's already pipping happening, a lot of times if we lean in there and talk, they start pipping more frequently.
Wow.
So I think there's definitely um, some value to the hen being there, and she's kind of actively involved in the hatching process in that way. And then I think even hearing each other hatching and just all of the activity and stuff
Yeah.
also sort of feeds into that. And they can make vocalizations from inside the egg. So sometimes I don't think I've heard an egg vocalize yet that hasn't started pipping at all. But like even very early on, like when there's just a small one little crack, you'll hear little peeps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's like they're telling their siblings that they're hatching, right? I mean, if no one hears that noise until hatching is happening, I think that could definitely be part of synchronizing the hatching, which is kind of beneficial for the whole brood because
Right.
it means they're not sitting around at the nest waiting for a predator to find them and eat them, or that somebody's not so behind on hatching that they're going to get left and they're going to
Right.
hatch when everybody's already gone.
Right. And I would presume that in that situation you just described where you go to the incubator, you start talking and they react to you, they probably would respond more strongly to you versus if I came down to visit, they wouldn't really respond to my voice, I assume. Is that correct?
That is correct, and, Marcus, I don't know if we're supposed to talk about this or not, but, like, we have been doing a, I guess we've been doing a sound experiment where we're playing recordings to them, and, they are exposed to the voices of the researchers that they're going to imprint on,
Hello,
starting
it's
at
Ava
day
again.
15 of incubation, which is when they
Isn't
can
it?
begin to detect sound. So
So
they are
so the
specifically
recorders are
hearing.
actually talking to them periodically throughout that process. In other words,
Yeah.
and that started at what did you say, day 15, which is
Mhm.
when they should be able to hear now,
Did you know when you grow up, you're gonna
Yeah.
be so cute?
like based on
You're
their
gonna be
development.
shaped like a football, and you're also
A
going to look
a
like a
maintenance
football.
person at the facility told me that they got like really freaked out because they like went in there at night and heard something. They heard like singing in the room, and then they like looked in there and no one was there, and they were like, "I just got freaked out and like ran away."
They walk in and it's a voice recording of Marcus reading Illumination in the Flatwoods to these poults.
And then a snake came in.
That's so funny. So seriously, what do you say in the voice recording, or do you read something or?
So it was actually, I think like all of my team thought I was crazy because out, once we got the eggs and stuff, I was like, okay, we got to make sure that we got our recordings correctly and everything. And so we all like went into our external storage shed outside of the office because we were trying to get somewhere quiet. And so we were just like standing together in the storage room in a circle with an MP3. And I'm like, okay, we're just gonna pass the MP3 around. So we're like standing in a circle with the MP3.
This is not
And
weird.
like, okay, guys, like just say what you're gonna say to the poults, talk like you're gonna talk to them, because they have to start imprinting on you. And like one of my technicians is from China, so I'm like, are you gonna talk to them in Mandarin, like, or English, because that's what you should do here. And so we were just standing around passing it, and everybody felt super awkward because they're like, I don't know what to say. And so, um, some of us were just like saying encouraging things like, you're going to do so good. You're going to catch so many bugs.
You
And
get out of that shell.
some people were just telling them like about, oh, like I'm watching this show called Severance. Like, honestly, I think I have them all memorized from being in that room so much and hearing the same recordings
Oh
over
my
and over.
gosh. That would
But,
drive me crazy.
yeah, some of us like read them poems or sang them a little song, or some people just didn't know what to say, so they like looked up turkey facts and like how to attract turkeys to your property and stuff.
They're
So-
like reciting our online training. Too.
Yeah,
And this is how we make really good brooding cover. You're going to love it.
We should just play him the podcast.
one of my
Hey,
favorites is
Well,
like
for the ones
Brielle.
that I'm going to be that's what we could do. We could just like put them on, repeat for the whole podcast. So they'll
Yeah.
imprint to me.
I would like really get the views up too. That playing 24/7.
Yeah, there you go.
We need it. Boost those numbers.
Also, like
That's so funny.
turkeys listening to a turkey podcast. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, this is like for people that love turkeys. How could you not just be glued to the screen right now with this conversation, all this footage? I know, Will, you haven't seen a lot of it, so you'll have to go back and watch it.
Well, I know we were
But-
talking yesterday, and you were hyping all the footage to me, and I was like, "Can we watch it while we record so I can actually react to it?"
Yeah.
But we're not there yet technologically.
Yeah. So we know what footage we have, but Will actually doesn't. But to me, like, just even though I've been in a part of it, like I've already learned a lot of this stuff, I'm still glued to the conversation because it's just like, man, these little dinosaurs are awesome.
Mhm.
All of the biology of the species and everything that goes into this, and I also wonder how could they ever pull off a brood? Like, how do they ever get to adulthood in the wild? It's pretty remarkable.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, they're literally just on the ground and in the forest full of predators, and the babies are pretty helpless. They can't fly or even run very fast or anything right after hatching. So they're just like easy prey.
Yeah, and they also aren't very good at hunting yet. They are instinctually, they look like little velociraptors.
Yeah.
But in the first couple of days, they're not actually catching much, right? So can you talk
Right.
us through that, Kelly?
Yeah.
Like what
so
after they've gotten out of the egg, how does that look?
Well, okay, so right after they hatch, we have sort of this imprinting phase where we take them out of the incubator and they go into these little pop-up tents with the person that they're imprinting on. And they get intermittent sessions hanging out with their person just to have physical contact with them and hear their voice and see them moving and all that. And then they go back into these hatch incubators that are just better for them to be able to like walk around in and stuff. So we're trying not to like shock their systems and just bring them out into the world immediately. Just because we can't really like sit on them like the hen does, and like we might not be as good or effective. We don't have a brood patch to provide warmth, so we're still being careful and like putting them back in the incubator and then bringing them out during that first day. But then once they're all hatched and dry, by then they seem to be pretty strongly imprinted on their person. One thing that we'll notice is as they become more bonded, they look at their person frequently. Like when you're just sitting in the tent with them, you'll just see them like looking up at you. I think there's a very like iconic picture of Joe Hutto like making intense eye contact with bolts, and that's what it's like. So they very much like recognize their person, and then when they're all hatched and dry, they get acclimated to outside and the foraging plots. And usually in that first day, they stay pretty close to their hen, and they just wander around kind of like aimlessly. Like they don't really stick together in a group or anything. They just kind of like wander around and peck everything. regardless of what it is. So they're just kind of investigating and learning to peck. And sometimes, like, they might catch something on that first day while they're acclimating or eat something, but it's not, overall, they're not just being successful hunters from the get-go.
Yeah, I've watched a few ducklings chase flies, newly hatched ducklings, and they're not very good at it. So I imagine it's probably kind of akin to that.
Yeah.
Um, have you noticed? You said something that Kelly that jogged my memory, and I remember in Illumination in the Flatwoods, Joe Hutto, who you just brought up, said that there was a certain color of shirt or something that he noticed that the turkeys responded differently to. Maybe it was blue. Have you noticed
Purple, I'm
anything
pretty
like
sure.
that with the poults responding to you wearing different clothes, or do you try to keep that
Oh,
consistent?
yeah, we required everyone to wear neutral earth tones for the
Okay.
imprinting process because that is true. There's been a lot of like weird imprinting studies with chickens where and other species, and they do preferentially imprint on certain stimuli. So,
Mhm.
and color is a big one of them. So if you had like a purple stuffed animal versus a green stuffed animal, and you know, had the different birds imprint, and they might imprint better on the green one and less good on the purple one just because they have this innate preference that sort of in nature, and right, they want to make sure they imprint on the correct thing that is the hen and not like a
Right.
random bush or something that isn't gonna raise them. So
Yeah,
they do have those innate preferences, and we try to like standardize as much as possible across hens to not let that affect anything.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it wasn't. I think it was purple that they're just like, according to Joe, they really didn't like it,
Is
right?
that what it was? Yeah, he had like a purple sweatshirt or something, I remember.
Well, the only reason I'm thinking that, maybe Kelly, I know you've read it recently, more recently than I have. I need to go back to it. In fact, I should do that before I imprint a clutch on me. Uh, but I remember when I was reading it, I immediately associated it with things in the wild that might be bad for them,
Mhm.
like berries or something that are poisonous, or like I was trying to think of like what in the wild would be a problem that has that kind of color variation.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I think that's one thing. And then during the imprinting stage specifically, I think they are going to prefer things that look like what a hen looks like.
yeah, which that makes
So
sense that they should.
yeah, a hen is always kind of brown and tan, maybe a little bit of reddish in there, but
Mhm.
she's never purple. So if you imprint something, any quote that has ever existed in the history of the universe that's imprinted on something purple has probably died.
That's a
Yeah,
good point.
wasn't good for it. Yeah. So just going back to that initial development, so you're imprinting them on you, and they're also not very good at hunting. Are you doing anything to mimic the hen? Is she doing anything to try to help them become better hunters?
Yeah, so during that acclimation phase, we try our best to do what we think the hen would be doing and also standardize that across people. And so when they're first learning, we will sort of walk around with them and we'll point out things that are food. And then a lot of times, us pointing them out causes them to investigate it further.
Hmm.
And then when they start to see things, like they'll get to a point. Usually, the the second or third day outside is when they get really good at detecting movement.
Mm.
And so I think part of that is just experiencing it and having that natural instinct kick in, and part of it is us pointing out that things that are moving are food. But yeah, they do learn, like, if especially the young poults that we're trying to teach. If you put your hand on the ground, usually they'll run over because they get used to the fact that you're pointing out food, and if they catch it, it's kind of like rewarding for them. So it's almost like they're wild animals, are not very trainable, but it is kind of a sign that they are pretty good at learning from the hen.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that has stuck out to me, and I know Will, and a lot of people feel this way, but I know Will does because I've heard him talk about it. But that feeling you get when a bird dog points? Isn't that just an amazing thing?
Yeah.
What about when a bird points? Because when I have been out there, especially in that first brood that we were foraging, I came out, one of the things that just like got burned into my brain was when they were learning how to forage, especially when it's a fly or something that's really fast. They will come up, they'll approach it really slow, and they look like a dog pointing
Oh,
a
wow.
bird. They will
So they're doing that
freeze.
stalk.
Yeah, they'll freeze with their their head extended toward it and kind of like ease up to it and then, really jolt out and grab it. And I think
Yeah.
we have some footage of
That's
this.
so neat.
I was also
But
really excited the first time I saw that. Like, they're getting to the point now they detect movement, but instead of just pecking aimlessly, they're actually
yeah,
strategically standing still, kind of
yeah, now
crouching
they're
down,
now they're hunting it.
aiming, and fire.
I pictured it being a lot more chaotic than that, with them just kind of like running around and hopping up in the air and flapping their wings and trying to just catch stuff haphazardly. But I guess that doesn't really make sense because it probably wouldn't be very effective given the number of insects they need to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really insane how quickly their foraging strategies develop.
Yeah.
They go from aimlessly pecking everything, but they kind of just from experience and from I think certain things just really triggering their their hunting drive, and then having more success with some things than others, they learn and improve. And even like the second day outside is usually when they start to do some level of cooperative foraging. So instead of just
Mm.
walking around on their own, they actually group up and walk around together.
Like in a
And
line.
yeah,
Mm.
so if one bird misses an insect,
Mm-hmm.
another bird is probably going to see it and have a chance to get it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
they
they're
can,
like flushing at each other.
yeah.
Yeah. That's so fascinating.
I don't know if you knew Kelly, but yesterday when I was out there, I saw the poults try to chase down a green anole.
Huh.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I got a little bit of it on footage, so we can cut it in if I get it to Charlotte. But I guess I've been kind of surprised, especially early, because I've seen them eat some caterpillars. Like I'm like, how did you even swallow that thing? But also like that anole's the same size they are, and they're like, we're gonna eat you
Yeah.
if we can catch you.
So
We'll
at
figure
some
it
point,
out.
at some point they learned to rip stuff apart. Like yesterday, one of Mark's birds, which was yesterday, they were day 11. They caught a full grown katydid,
Uh-huh.
and like they killed it and they like ripped it apart and ate it. Um, and
That's
then
so
Like
fascinating.
actually,
when I said they
Jay's
are like little raptors, they're
Yeah.
it looks like a little velociraptor
Yeah.
running around like ripping things apart.
Well, and what was so interesting, I had this thought earlier and then I lost it for a second, but Kelly, you said that the yolk lasts them about 3 days, right? And so it makes sense that that's about the timeline that it takes them to get effective at catching insects. So that's really
yeah,
I
interesting how it
had
all
like
aligns.
that kind of stuff you don't really gain an appreciation for until you are a turkey mama.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know what I mean? Like you're learning things about these turkeys that I don't know how else you would know.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I think they also sometimes they eat things that they shouldn't, and they're not necessarily smart. I mean, they have a lot of patience,
Yeah.
but they do things
Careful, Kelly.
really bad for them sometimes. So you also have to kind of it's kind of anxiety inducing. I guess it's probably just like with a human baby, right? Like
Yeah.
if there's some kind of trouble that they can get into, they're gonna get into it. If there's a hole that they can stick their head in, they're probably gonna stick their head in and like hurt themselves. So you have to watch them really closely because sometimes they try to eat things that like one brood the first time like we initially put them outside. So we were giving them wax worms during the imprinting process because in the wild, like while the birds are hatching, the hen will sometimes grab an insect nearby and begin to offer it to them, like even while the rest of them are hatching. So we were doing that as well. And there are like these pollen catkin stalks in the plots that kind of look like a waxworm. And so like the first thing a poult, but they're like big, and the first thing a poult did was just grab one and just like swallow the whole thing. And I was like, are they just gonna eat all of the catkins and die? Because like there's no way that's good for them. Like it's a big, fluffy, like non-nutritious piece of like fiber that it's not really digestible. So I was like, do we have to like remove all of these from the plot or something? But it was interesting because after one ate one, it was fine, but then it never ate another one. So I think like it felt something that it didn't like, and it was like, okay, no. So sometimes they learn.
It's like a digestive feedback.
Yeah, if they get a chance, but it's also kind of nerve-wracking. And there was one, well, the day we brought it outside, it actually captured like a really large wolf spider. Like it caught it, and then it was able to break off the abdomen and eat it. But the abdomen was still really large, and so it was standing there like for a good 5 minutes, like just repeatedly like doing a swallowing motion, and then it would like sit there and just like close its eyes. And I was like, are you dying right before my eyes from choking? Like, what do I do? And do I intervene? Like, and eventually it got it down, but it took it like 5 minutes of just, nervously watching this bird, like, are you choking right now? So it probably maybe learned from that experience too, that it's not the best idea to eat something
that's bigger than your head,
bigger than your throat. Yeah.
So is that what you're seeing them eat a lot of? Is the traditional, like what we read about in the literature, like the spiders and the little green, like leafhopper grasshoppers?
Yeah, lots of leafhoppers, other like baby, like katydid nymphs and stuff like that, ants, spiders. They it also changes as they get older. So the young ones are best at catching things that are like slower moving, like in ants and spiders. And then they get really good at catching like the things that are hopping around, like moths and grasshopper type things as they get older.
So that brought up another thing that I found really interesting personally. They also, like clearly they mistake some things as food and they're learning through that. And they also instinctively know that they should eat some things like the leafhoppers or ants or whatever. But they also have an innate ability to know not to eat some things that could otherwise be mistaken as food. Could you talk about that a little bit, Billy?
Yeah, so I mean, in the plots right now, we have a lot of those like fuzzy, poisonous caterpillars, and they definitely actively choose not to eat those because they'd be very easy to catch. Right, they're really slow. And we've even just to like see what they do. We kind of pointed one out, and they will almost like have this visual look of like disgust. Like
Yeah, they have like a
oh, look at that. They're like, ew, get that away from me.
yeah, like when I observed this, Will, they like came up, like they ran up, like, oh, they're offering food.
Yeah.
Let's go see what it is. And then they get close enough to it, and they had like a visceral reaction.
Yeah.
Like, oh wait, we can't eat that. No,
Yeah.
yuck. Like gross.
Yeah.
Marcus loves to offer them things and see if they eat it. He put a frog up to one of them, and it was like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, this thing is way too big to eat.
It ran away.
Marcus's inner child has been awakened by this experiment. I mean, that's exactly the same thing that I would have done as a little boy. Like let's see if it eats this.
I'm reliving my childhood right now.
Yeah.
The other thing, those lubber grasshoppers, those eastern lubbers, like this giant grasshopper that's red and yellow. Well, when they are in their nymph stage, so right after they hatch, they're small. I mean, they're about the size of some of the grasshoppers we're seeing them eat, but they're black and they have orange lines on them. Have you seen those? those have hatched all around the area that they're foraging in, and that was another one that have offered them, and they almost like have this innate, just like it's almost like they give you the vomit like gag response. Like
Yeah.
when they see it, they're like, "Oh, yuck! Like,
Yeah.
get that thing away from me."
Yeah. You think it's the coloration that's instinctually driven, that bright coloration?
Well, we actually have talked about we should do an experiment, a diet trial. In fact, we're talking about doing this later on in the summer. We're going to document all of it. For folks that don't know out there, a lot of this footage is getting compiled into like a storyline video series on our YouTube, and we have a playlist for you. So if you want to just watch us go through all this, some of the stuff's pretty remarkable, and we're trying to diligently document it for people to learn from it. But one of the things we talked about in that diet trial is trying to figure out things like that. Like, what cues are they using? Like, you got this fuzzy caterpillar, and you could find all kinds of different colors of those, but they just don't eat. Do they just not eat fuzzy caterpillars, or is there something about coloration?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have things like that grasshopper. There's no fuzz on it, and then it's mostly black, but it has orange stripes on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, is that a coloration thing? But like when you offer it to them, they very clearly immediately know, do not eat that.
Yeah. And like it is really cool because, ecologists have all learned about what's called um aposematic coloration, where things that produce certain colors tend to be um distasteful and potentially poisonous and dangerous to eat. And so that kind of is universally known by the things that might eat it to avoid. But it's pretty cool to see how like the birds are just born knowing that.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah, that's the
respond
thing.
to preferences.
I kind of felt like it would have to be like a digestive feedback. Like they'd eat the lubber grasshopper one time, but they ain't doing it again. But that is not the case. The first, right when they get put in the facility, you offer it to them. It's the first time they've ever experienced it, and they know absolutely not even a chance that I'm trying that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Sounds
then I
like they're
agree, like the texture is probably also playing a role with different things, and it's interesting they have innate preferences with that too. Like maybe eating something that's super fuzzy is never a good thing, and so they just have this innate um preference because if birds avoid eating things that are colorful or eating things that are fuzzy and they survive better, that's going to continue to get passed down.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So one thing that we haven't talked about, Kelly, is I think we're kind of getting through that timeline almost until I guess this our initial experiments are scheduled to end with each brood when they reach flight, which is that key time where they can start roosting off of the ground and survival increases substantially in the wild. So that's kind of taking you through that timeline. But there have been some behaviors that have emerged that I know you guys were excited about, and because you sent me footage of it immediately when it happened, and I was like unable to sleep at night because of it. So can you talk about some of those behaviors? I'm curious to see where you go with it, and if you go to the ones I'm thinking about specifically.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind that was probably the most exciting for me is starting to see them like strut and do these sort of like almost like hashing out their hierarchies. Because we know that turkeys are extremely socially complex. They have these hierarchies as adults within groups as well as between groups. And so they have different displays that they do to hash that out. And that begins so early. Like, I think the soonest that we saw it was poults around 5 days old, began to kind of square up with each other. And so
strut at each other.
they'll literally like put out their wings, like make themselves like look big, and they'll kind of like raise
They did,
high. And
The thing about it, Will, they don't even have a tail yet, and they're still fanning.
Is there a trend by the sexes, or you see it more in one sex than another?
we don't know yet because we haven't sexed them
Right. Yeah.
accurately.
Okay. Yeah.
Um because you have to like invert the cloaca to sort
Right.
of like, be able to see if they have a protrusion or not, and it's
Yeah.
actually kind of dangerous if you
Yeah.
aren't an expert at it.
Yeah. So they're still
But
too young to have developed those secondary characteristics that would
yeah,
make them easily
but
identified. Gotcha.
our hunch is that it seems like both sexes do it. Obviously, we have to wait
Right.
to know for sure, but we have for some of like the older ones, what I learned from our field crew actually is that you can the males and the females have different looking poops.
Hmm.
So like the spiral poops
Yeah.
versus straight poops. And so we were like watching the ones that strutted and then um like keeping track of it and everything. And then we saw a female poop and we're like, "Oh, that was the one that's been strutting a bunch."
Hmm.
So I think that they it may be a universal behavior that they all sort of practice. And I would I will know for certain at some point if there's a difference between males and females and how often they do it and stuff like that. But
Right.
Yep. Not
um,
ready to talk about it
yeah,
yet.
even it's interesting because even though the females, they don't really use that for mate choice, they still probably may use similar displays for
Hmm.
hashing out the hierarchies.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I
And
remember.
I have seen hens strut, and I know people have, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen footage of that a bunch.
Yeah.
It's not as common, obviously, as the males, even as adults, but they do it.
Yeah. I had a hen by herself in a field last week, and I didn't know that she was by herself. I thought she had a gobbler with her, so I tried the classic trick, Marcus, of, getting her pissed off, and I was cutting at her a bunch, and eventually she came in and she went to half strut a couple times as she was coming
Nice,
in.
nice. Well, I just thought that was remarkable for the poults. Like, we're at day 5 and they're strutting.
Hmm.
Yeah, like that
That's pretty cool.
behavior is clearly so important if
Yeah.
it's developing
Yeah.
it and they're already practicing it. And again, it's too soon to tell, but I'm really excited to see if we can kind of watch it because we're quantifying all these behaviors as they're happening and stuff. So we'll be able to say, the bird that's initiating the strutting or the bird that's it's almost like a contest when they do it where a bird walks up squaring up with another one and that bird might kind of respond by doing the same thing and one of them will sort of end up being the clear winner of the interaction where the other one will stop like they'll never kind of do as elaborate of a display and then the other one will kind of like it's almost like they like shove up against them. And so
Hmm.
eventually one will just kind of like sit back and just stop doing anything and sort of submit. And
Well,
we'll
spinning
get to
into the
see if that turns out to be, really equate to dominance in the brood, where maybe that bird is getting stealing more of its siblings' prey, or has, some other kinds of like competitive perks because
Hmm.
it's the dominant one.
I was going to say, even when you said the submissive behavior, to some, in some of the interactions, it's even to the degree that the poult submits and it looks like a hen that is getting ready to be bred. Like,
Mm.
they get into that posture, and the other one might even like climb up on it.
Wow.
So it's been pretty remarkable
Yeah.
seeing that kind of behavior already starting to emerge, and they're barely even out of the egg.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, they don't even know how to catch food yet, and they're doing that.
That's so
Yeah.
interesting. Kelly, are y'all seeing any anti-predator behavior, like, a fear of like a bird, like I'm thinking like illumination in the flatwoods again, it's like a hawk or a vulture or something like that flies overhead. Do they react pretty strongly to that, or are they too young at this
Um,
point?
I've definitely seen some fear responses. We uh we have like these kind of like giant aviaries that they're in. So
Mhm.
predators are never really able to get very close to them.
Right.
And I don't know if any of us have really seen a direct response to a predator from the birds, but we have seen responses to like a loud noise, um, like the trash, like the dumpster being dumped really
Mhm.
loudly or something, like a big crash noise. They'll all drop like
Mhm.
at once. So it's really cool to see. Like they'll just be like walking around during the thing, and then they'll just like drop to the ground and freeze. So we've seen
Yeah, and
that.
that I did see two two times. One time crows. They
Mm.
Oh
responded
yeah.
to crows that way, and the other time I actually had a trumpet, and I clucked at them
Mhm.
on the trumpet, and they kind of took that as, "Oh shit, I better lay down. Mom's saying something's bad." That was the
Mm.
way
Yeah.
that. So, which tells me maybe I was too close to an alarm call when I did it,
Yeah.
but
Might check your
uh,
cluck, Marcus.
they very much reacted that way, and it
Yeah.
was an aggressive cluck. Like
Yeah.
you know, I could see why they would respond because I was so close to them. But I wasn't. I was just kind of like doing it because I've just been practicing with them so much, and I didn't think about it. And I was just standing there and didn't, just clucked one time, and everybody like responded that way.
Hmm.
Yeah, in general, like if there's a sound that they haven't heard before is usually when we see the fear response. But honestly, what's been surprising to me is just how kind of fearless they are overall. Because I thought that when we brought them outside, the reason we had this acclimation phase is because I was like, if we started just like the foraging trials immediately, like our data would be all messed up because they wouldn't be acting normally because they'd be all scared. But like they just go outside and start like they're so happy and excited seeming when they get outside. They're just like woo and they just like run
Mhm.
around carefree. They're not like staying with you. They don't need to be coaxed to start doing things.
Mm.
So I don't know. Yeah, for being like depredated at the rate that they are, I thought they would be so much more fearful and so much more dependent on the hen to coax
Mhm.
them.
Maybe that's why they're depredated so much
I
because
Yeah.
know,
they
yeah.
don't.
Maybe they need to have a little more fear.
Yeah.
But they are very perceptive. Like if there's a noise that they haven't heard before, like they definitely instinctually try to not be seen.
Yeah.
Um,
Are
but
there any evident differences that you're noticing between the different broods?
I would say yes. There's some that it's we don't really have like the sample size to you know, say what might be causing like
Sure.
the
To
trends,
yeah.
but I've seen like general differences. Like we have a clutch that was 10 eggs that hatched that we split into two different broods,
Mhm.
and one of them is just so active and athletic and had started doing things like jumping and flapping a lot really early on. Like even we have fenced in plots because they're supposed to stay in the foraging plot that they're in, and one of the birds in that brood was jumping over the fence, so like jumping and flopping over 2 feet by like day 6, I think.
Mhm.
And even the rest of the brood caught up pretty quickly, whereas birds from the same clutch in a different foraging plot didn't start actually jumping the fence until day 10.
Wow.
So that could be difference in how well they're foraging in different areas.
It's all I
Uh,
can do to not ask you what plots they were in right now and start drawing conclusions immediately.
Well, I was gonna say coincidentally, the one that has more foliage and bugs is the one that seems to be ahead in terms of their athleticism.
Imagine that.
yeah, but then it also
But we
like
are too
another.
soon to really make calls on
Yeah.
that.
I think also like there are just differences between the different broods where like you know there's some broods that pretty much didn't catch anything their first day outside, and then there's that brood that like a bird caught a giant wolf spider immediately.
Mhm.
So I think there are, inherent differences maybe based
Mhm.
off of like genetic factors or
Maybe sex
some
or
aspect of parental investment, like how much the mom invested in the eggs or something that may affect their quality.
Right. That's so fascinating.
it has been kind of remarkable also to me. Like we're well, one thing we didn't talk about this, but you know every single individual. Like we have it marked with color banding so that you know which brood it's in and which individual it is, so we could track individual trajectories and performance and behavior and all that stuff. So I feel like we need to give that context, but it's been interesting to me to see the data like on the weight and how much variation there is in
Hmm.
weight just within your brood. Like the
Yeah.
poults are different sizes within the brood. And they certainly are different sizes across broods, which is pretty interesting to me. And, I think one of the things that is of great interest to me personally is how much does that matter?
Right.
Like if you have one that's 20% bigger than the other one, like is that because it's male or is it because it's a better forager? And how much does that matter in terms of the overall success of the brood? Like how close do they need to be together? Does habitat quality regulate how close they are together? Questions like that I think are pretty important. And honestly, I don't know how we would ever get at it if we didn't have a a an experiment in place like this where we can be turkey mamas and go track everybody.
Yeah. I mean, you would never be able to quantify all of the behaviors of each individual within a brood and compare them with wild turkeys that, abandon the second that they see or hear human. So yeah, the imprinting is a really amazing process to be able to utilize for research. And yeah, I would say that there's more variation between broods than within brood, but even within a clutch, the eggs do have some variation in size, and the poults have some variation in hatching mass, and that those mass differences do seem to sort of be exacerbated throughout development. So it will kind of be interesting to see if the birds that are just bigger from the get-go tend to keep their advantage and to become the dominant ones, or if it's more
Are they the
about,
ones strutting?
yeah, or is it more just about, their social dynamics and how they work that out that ultimately determines which
Well,
ones do
You
yeah,
know,
better.
also could be random. Like this one got lucky and caught a couple wolf spiders, and this other one never encountered anything that was easy to catch, and then one day of that, and all of a sudden they're on a different trajectory because,
Yeah,
just
that's
something
true.
random.
The early life conditions have these cascading effects. So there's definitely some luck involved too.
you know, if if this was even possible, I mean, what hearing you guys talk about this and the difference in the eggs and the difference in we even talked about the ability of the hen to incubate earlier and how that affects even the first few days of life and the differences in individuals within a brood and then between broods and so on and so forth makes you or makes you really really appreciate the role of quality habitat because it is just influences everything everything
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, and
I agree.
what's cool is, we want to keep these birds as long as we can and look at the long-term effects of natal habitat, and maybe we'll be able to say, really quantify how important that is. That if you get to start off on a high quality habitat as a poult,
Are you more successful as an adult?
does that mean that you're going to be the male that gets all of the mates, or you're going to be the female that produces all of the big broods or the big eggs?
yeah but I mean you start
Or you
thinking about
initiate more or whatever.
what we've learned about whitetails in the recent years, Marcus, like how there's these generational effects that may be related to the epigenetics of the conditions that the mom experiences in her life. And, improving range may take multiple generations to trickle down
Yeah, to
to the
turn
new
on those
individuals
genes.
entering that population, and just thinking about how complex all this is and interrelated is just so fascinating and profound to think about, how important it is to consider habitat at every level because of that.
Yeah, and even within a lot of other bird species, there's just a lot of evidence about how important those early life conditions are, and how just the conditions that you're born into really strongly determine whether you fledge and whether you recruit into the breeding population. And like you said, maybe even these like silver spoon effects where, if you had really advantageous conditions at birth, maybe the eggs that you produce are going to end up being bigger or higher quality,
Yeah.
Or
based
or maybe
some epigenetic like effect of like not having stress hormones during that period, or whatever
Hmm.
complex pathway may be
Hmm.
explaining it.
yeah, or maybe you just know like whatever's imprinted or not imprinted, innate. Like you have an innate preference for things that are better for you. Like there's all kinds of ways that this could go about it, but that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this experiment, because I mean it's just so awesome, and it's also addressing a fundamental problem that we have in our understanding of turkey biology. We know, based on our radio transmitter stuff and data that's collected in the wild, that we have a real bottleneck at the poult stage, but like the kinds of detailed information to really understand why we're getting that now in
Yeah.
this study. And that's one of the things you said, Kelly, earlier. Trying to figure out a long-term plan to keep it funded long enough for us to figure out all of this stuff is the critical thing. And I'd love to be a turkey mama, and I'm making time to do that, so that I can be a part of this. But also, that's what I'm spending my time doing, is trying to figure out how are we going to sustain this long enough to get the information we need so that we can really move the needle on in wild populations. So,
Yeah.
I spend a lot of my time doing that.
Well, I trust you'll find a way, and I have a feeling that we're going to be talking about this a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't that just a cool conversation?
Oh, absolutely. Just a fun one to have.
So,
Yeah.
Kelly, we usually give people an open-ended question at the end of, well, what did we not ask, or what would you like to share, or whatever. But I might direct you a little more than that, and if you have something that fits that bill, you can say that too. But I'm wondering, what has been the most crazy thing that has happened, like that just like sticks in your mind, like, man, I did not expect that.
I mean, I guess I've sort of already maybe indicated this, but I think just how how much innate knowledge that they
Yeah.
have, and how, like, for example, when we brought them outside for the first time, it was just like something turned on and they just kicked into foraging mode, and they're like, they went from never being outside and never walking around to just running around pecking everything. um
Like something turned the
yeah,
Velociraptor gene on, and
yeah, and they just like kicked into, foraging mode instantly. And yeah, just the way that, like, even though we don't know everything that a turkey mom does, and probably aren't doing everything exactly the way a turkey mom does, they seem to be just following this developmental trajectory where it's like,
yeah, they're
on this day
thriving
they start
anyway.
doing this, on this day they start doing this, and then they're they're getting better. I mean, we weigh them before and after each foraging trial, and at first they're losing mass every time because they're expending all this energy and not being efficient. But at some point it turns and it happens fast, and they're like really good at foraging and they're gaining mass from it. So
Yeah, another good reason to have a nice egg yolk reserve. To
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
You're just
You,
like coasting into the gas station. You
right.
got to get there.
Yeah.
And it's like it happens so fast because, at the beginning they really do need to be taught some things. Like they don't understand the concept of drinking, for example. Like you have to be like, look, that's water, like drink that.
Mhm.
And they have to learn. So they at first just seem like, how do these things survive? They're so bad at life, and you know they don't know how to go under like the heat. Like just something basic like don't sit out in the cold and die when there's heat right here. But like you have to show them how to do it. So it's like even though they're precocial, they need to be taught. But then it's like they become so much more independent every single day, and like yeah, all of this innate knowledge kicks in.
And then 2 years later, Marcus, they're making us question everything that we know. When they leave us
Mhm.
sitting empty-handed in the woods.
Like, I want to know, when did they figure out the disappearing act?
Right.
Because the turkey can be there and then evaporate into
I
nothingness
think that's instinctual.
immediately. Like, how did they do that? We're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Kelly. I really enjoyed learning about everything that y'all are doing, and I can't wait to get down there.
Yeah, it was really fun, and we'll have to talk more about it because there's so many more cool polled behaviors to discuss.
Yeah, and I mean, just think about next year when we have poults, and we also have poult mamas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, we're going
Add a whole nother
to
layer
just,
to all this.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, this is just the beginning, and this is an awesome opportunity because we have all of this information on every individual going back to when it was still an egg. And so if we
Mhm.
can have that information all the way through its life and relate
yeah.
that to everything.
And we also have a lot of information about most of their moms. And
Yeah.
and we
That's
might
something we didn't even
have,
mention.
yeah, we might have a lot of information on their dads, because we are going to get genetic profiles of them, and we have genetics on males and females on the sites that they're coming from,
Right.
Yeah.
and
So
movement, behavior,
who
and
are their
survival.
dads? Do they all have the same dads? Do they all have the same moms? Is there brood parasitism going on? Is there, are their parents diseased? Are their parents skinny or fat? Like, yeah, all of that.
God, what a
Well,
rich research area.
I mean, just think of it's like unlimited opportunity. It really comes down to keeping it funded.
Yeah.
Like the opportunity to learn that, and to put this in perspective for folks out there, I don't think that there is another captive wild turkey population where you can do this kind of stuff.
Mm.
I'm not aware of it. If it exists, maybe the listener knows of one, they can let me know. But like, this is an unprecedented opportunity.
yeah. Even like, we measure the male's spur length and beard length and stuff like that. So we can potentially even look at the heritability of those structures.
You'll
And
have their disease status, I'm sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, everything we could think of to measure, we have
Yeah.
measured on every single part of this whole thing.
Right.
So,
Well, maybe we can at least revisit what happened with the broods, later this summer.
yeah,
I would love to do that.
yeah. Well, we're going to have different life stages during poulthood, right? So,
Right.
like, when they're 6 weeks old, it's going to be a completely new story.
Yeah.
yeah.
And
It's still very early on. Like our oldest brood is 12 days old today. So, and we only
and look
have
at what we've already
I
gained from
know.
it.
I know. We just effortlessly were able to have an hour and a half conversation about it, and it's only not even 2 weeks in.
yeah, yeah, and we could go on, but yeah, we'll save the rest for another time.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, that was great.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I know that you got a lot going on, and we appreciate you taking the time. Thanks, everybody out there, for listening. All the support has been really remarkable, and the continued support, even though the season is closed down in a lot of the South. That's special. So I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. Like we said, we've got tons of things coming down the chute like this where you're not going to be able to get it anywhere else. It's going to come out here.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.